Welcome back to PHIL 2103, Introduction to Philosophy and Ethics. This is the last major section that you're going to be dealing with in the course. Congratulations on making it this far. Now we're going to step into the final section for your final worldview paper, which covers pacifism and the just war theory. And so we're beginning to ask some questions that help us to shape this discussion as we go. The primary question I want to ask you, and I want you to start thinking through, is under what circumstances is it okay to go to war? Why would we go to war? What would make it to where it is justified for us as a nation, us as a world, to embark in this horrible act of war? Is there any reason that it's okay? Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, said, "War may sometimes be a necessary evil, but no matter how necessary, it is always an evil, never a good. We will not learn how to live together in peace by killing each other's children." So there are three primary positions that we're going to look at. And I want you to take some time to understand each of these positions. Though for your paper, the primary you're going to be focused on is nonviolent pacifism and activism, or that is the just war theory. So the first primary position is pacifism. Pacifism says that participation in war is usually never justifiable. Now there's some grades within pacifism. So for example, nonviolent pacifism says that no use of violence whatsoever is permissible. Non-participation pacifism takes it even a step further and says that even behind-the-scenes work that supports a war or national defense during peacetime is to be shunned. That is, you couldn't work at a factory that was supporting a war if you were a non-participation pacifists. And then from there, we have the Christian position. There are Christian shades of pacifism and non-Christian shades of pacifism. The distinct hallmark of the Christian position is, what does God have to say on the issue? Does God command us to go to war, or does God command us to turn the other cheek? And we're going to look at both positions. Christians in the pacifistic view say that we should never participate in the war to a point of killing others in order to resist evil, because God has commanded man never to take the life of another. You can see this in Exodus 20:13, Deuteronomy 32:35, Leviticus 19:18, Isaiah 34, Jonah chapter 4, and many more. A less stringent pacifist might argue that using force to wound or maybe disarm someone may be allowable, because then you are preventing evil from happening. But to the point of killing, a Christian pacifist would say we are therefore violating God's command, and only God has the right to take a life, according to Job 1:21. The next shade is nonviolent pacifism. Now, nonviolent pacifism is what you're going to primarily focus on in your paper. Nonviolent pacifism insists that all use of violence, and particularly lethal force, cannot be justified. It says that participation in war is always immoral, and even violence used in self-defense may not be allowed. So the typical scenario comes up that someone breaks into your house at night, and you, your spouse, your children are there. What do? A nonviolent pacifist would say that you would use any creative means possible to disarm the situation, but you are not to engage in any form of fighting, any form of retaliation, or any way where you would hurt that other person, because then you have overstepped your bounds. Now, certain religions in both the East and the West support nonviolent pacifism. And some famous pacifists you may be familiar from history, of course, would be Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. As you've seen from your readings, Martin Luther King was a staunch pacifist. And I've said in class before that when it comes to the civil rights issue, I strongly believe that had it not been Dr. King that was at the forefront, and had he not held to this nonviolent pacifistic position, that we would not be where we are today in a society that tolerates people of every color and that is equal, as we're fighting to be at least, in that direction. Because had it been Malcolm X or someone who was employing more violent means, I believe that the hearts of those who were kind of orchestrating this and kind of causing it to be this way in society would have hardened and never melted. Dr. King taught that love is the only force that is capable of transforming an enemy into a friend. He says that we never get rid of an enemy by meeting hate with hate, but we get rid of an enemy by getting rid of enmity, that is hostility towards one another. The only way to truly kill your enemy, in his view, was to remove that hatred that was between you and turn that enemy into a friend. And he said that people have a moral responsibility to be intelligent. The heart, as he said, can never be totally right if the head is totally wrong. The call for intelligence is a call for open-mindedness, sound judgment, and love for the truth. He also taught that there's some good in the worst of us, and there's some evil in the best of us. Now, this is not a yin-yang. The yin-yang says that there's some good and evil, and there's some evil and good. That would be more related to God, in whom we know there is no shifting shadow. There is no evil within God. But we are sinful and fallen human beings, and so even the greatest of us is marred by sin, and even the worst of us still bears the image of God. And he says that we love our enemies by realizing that they are not totally bad, and that they are not beyond the reach of God's redemptive love. Even those which we have problems with, that we even hate, are created in the image of God, lovingly, intricately formed by God himself in their mother's womb. And so we mar the very nature of God when we hate that which he has created. Martin Luther King also said that the nonviolent approach calls up unknown resources of strength and courage and provides new self-respect for those who are committed to nonviolence. It stirs the conscience of the opponent that reconciliation becomes a reality. And this is where I agree with him, that had he not had that approach, where would we be today as a society if he had not been the reformer that we look to? Now, the next primary position we're going to talk about is activism. Activism is in many ways the opposite of pacifism. And when it comes to Christian activism, it says that the Christian ought to participate in any war that is engaged in by the government because government is ordained by God. Disobedience to the government, even an evil one, is a greater evil than disobedience to an unjust government in an unjust war. Disobedience leads to revolution, anarchy, disorder, and chaos. Someone in this position may say, "It is my country, right or wrong." The Christian activist uses several scriptures, that is, to support their position. They says in Romans that the government does not hold the sword in vain, that each government was established by God for a specific purpose. And so they say that in supporting the government, we are supporting God's plans. We look to, for example, the book of Revelation, where in their time frame, there was one of the most evil rulers the world had seen. And yet still the position was that we should support the position even if we don't necessarily support the person. Excuse me. The next position is the mediating position, and that's selectivism. Selectivism, when it comes to the Christian realm, says that Christians should participate in some wars, but only that which is just. Christians must obey the higher moral law of God. That is, that we are against unconditional destruction of any person, and that we are against any acts that would be considered wrong or deemed too extreme by modern society. Even the otherwise pacifistic Dietrich Bonhoeffer finally concluded that Hitler would have to be assassinated. If you know the background story behind that, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a pacifist. He was a pastor in Germany around the time when Hitler arose, and he became a part of a secret cabal that was destined or set themselves in place to assassinate Hitler because he believed that Hitler was the greatest evil that the world had ever faced to that point. And so even though he was a pacifist by nature, he believed that this problem had to be taken care of. A Christian selectivist will look at Exodus 20:13 and say that the proper interpretation is not "thou shalt not kill," but "thou shalt not murder." They'll make a distinction between killing, which may be, premeditated, which may be, between murder, which may be premeditated and may have evil intent, with killing as a result of a conflict, where it may not have any evil intent behind it. It may be a result of natural course of actions. They would also say that capital punishment is not murder, in that you are preventing further evil from society, and that killing in self-defense is not murder because you are merely responding to a situation that has been forced on you. They would say that war in the defense of an innocent person or to protect against an unjust aggressor is not murder. And they would say that anyone who does not protect his wife and children against a violent intruder has failed them morally. So the selectivist position shows that some wars and some personal violent situations may require force, but that there is a difference between murder and between killing. So let's look at some historical positions and theological takes on this. As this is a Wesleyan university, and which rose out of the thinking of John Wesley, we do want to look at John Wesley's views. John Wesley was a strong critic who spoke out against the abhorrence and curse of war. Wesley spoke out so strongly against it that he said that war is a horrid reproach to the Christian name, yea, to the name of man, to all reason and to all humanity. So he didn't really mince words. Wesley was against war. And Wesley always practiced what he preached. He was one who was thorough in what he believed, being a part of also what he did in life. And he consistently urged the Methodists, which was the group that he initially had started, not to retaliate in the face of mob intimidation. When under attack personally, he would also seek to maintain a peaceable and non-violent demeanor. So Wesley's position against war was that it is always wrong, it's always bad. If you choose to take that position or examine his position in your paper, you'll need to know that's the case. And his is a little bit more simple and well-defined because he never changed his views. Now when we talk about the Church of God, which is the religious body that this institution rises out of, we need to talk a little bit about more of a shaping history that happened. You see, in the early Church of God movement, a strong minority of the people supported nonviolent pacifism. And when we say strong minority, these were people who were very influential over the movement. These were people who were editors at the Gospel Trumpet, which was our magazine that helped shape our group, our non-denominational movement. In 1897, 2 Gospel Trumpet articles extended the practices of holiness and love, which are key focus for the Church of God, and love of neighbor, to include Christian pacifism. So it was seen that to be a good follower of Jesus meant to be a pacifist as well. In the book I Saw the Church, it stated, Christians were not only forbidden to endure their enemies, but were also forbidden to even delight in their afflictions. So it was to the point where we were not only not allowed to hurt someone, but we shouldn't be happy when someone else got hurt, which sounds very biblical in that regard. When asked whether a Christian should go to war, Russell Byram flatly stated, "We answer no, emphatically no. There is no place in the New Testament wherein Christ gave instructions to followers to take the life of a fellow man." Byram taught that Christians should not participate in warfare. F.G. Smith, who was his successor at the Gospel Trumpet, also then followed Christian pacifism. So these beliefs started to filter out further into the movement. Despite this, however, the Gospel Trumpet also identified with patriotism and expressed sincere appreciation for the military and United States flag. And so we are a very patriotic movement, but we were also one who saw pacifism as the proper way to go. Now this position was altered dramatically during World War II. During this time, articles began to appear in the Gospel Trumpet supporting the Christians' participation in military service. So much like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, we found that Hitler was a greater enemy than we had faced, and we found that at this point a selectivist view must be taken to where we must engage in this war for the greater good of humanity. And at this time, only a few letters to the editor actually spoke out against pacifism, but primarily we focused on the patriotism side and focused on the fact that we had a higher duty and calling to our country. So this has been a very brief introduction to several of the forms of pacifism, but now we need to talk about some deeper issues to help you get a more full understanding before you have to write your paper.